Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is September 16, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Thomas Flight. Thomas, where in the heck you calling in from?
I am calling today from Asheville, North Carolina.
How cool is that? The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
The best thing for a human being, I don't know. I'm going to go with my gut. For some reason, the first thing that popped into my head was like time and space. Maybe I just want those things right now, but that's what popped into my head.
Dude, that's great. That's what I want is gut, hunch, all this is just your intuition, first thought, best thought. That was perfect. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
That's a good question. My favorite form, I want to say visual on some level. I'm a cinema guy, but that's
Yeah.
more than visual is the thing. But if I had to pick like one sense, I think visual.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think we're looking for things that we recognize. We're looking for ourselves, like experiences that we can relate to.
It's a really good answer, dude. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Uh, I think it's, I think I would probably say it's more innate, but the complication there is I think there's a way in which it also begets itself. So as we collect more information, we've built systems that incentivize the collecting of more information. So there's an amplifying process to it, but I think it's very innate in that eh, it's a very propelled path that we're on. That I think it would be very hard to disconnect from. So yeah.
It's good. Do thoughts create emotions?
Um, that's a tough one. I would say it seems like they do, but a lot of times the more time I've spent trying to investigate my own internal landscape, I think often it looks more like thoughts might arise out of emotions. Um, but yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one to untangle.
Thank you. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I think it's as invented as language is. Um,
Good.
which is just
Let's leave that because you're going to get
okay.
into you anticipated the next couple questions. I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until I can put it into words.
Pretty good, dude. I like that you took a breath. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan
Yeah.
Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. And then Wittgenstein likes to quote Duma Hell or whatever his name is about something about visual. So I'll send you a copy of my book and it opens with that quote. But that was good until I put it in words. You didn't say until I say it. So you one upped Marshall. That's pretty good. Now, here's the question you anticipated. Can humans think without language?
So it's funny because this might sound contradictory to I don't know. These are tough questions because these center on issues that I'm like trying to process through in my life right now. So I'm kind of torn. Part of me wants to say that I think there's a type of thinking that does um does not directly correspond to language or words. But maybe we need a better word than thinking for those things, those ideas. Um, so yeah, I think that's
That's
what I
good.
would.
And this is what I appreciate. There's no right or wrong answers to these questions. It's just you sussing out your feelings and your thoughts because basically we can't separate feelings from thoughts, but we think we can
Right.
because we invented the 2 words.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
here's another stupid question in that regard. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I think in a fundamental sense, we are more feeling beings. I think because I think there's there m- my gut is that there's a level on which we already kind of exist and interact with the world in a felt way, and thinking and language are much more about trying to express those things to others.
Yeah. Yeah, Bridget Bardot says, "When I make love, I don't think," this is in honor of the great Jean-Luc Godard, who blew up cinema and says, "I'm out of here." Know? But Bridget Bardot says, "I don't think when I make love." That's like, good luck. How can you stop or like the people who meditate, they go, "I'm thinking about not thinking,"
Right.
you know. But Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Thomas, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I think I think when language breaks down, that's when we have to reach for the deepest tools that we have in the tool chest. Like, to me, that's what art is trying to explore, is the edge of what we are trying to communicate without that, but that we don't just have words for. If you could just write a expository paragraph about it, you know, do you need, you know, an hour and a half long, deep narrative that kind of touches you in some deep way, or a poem that kind of breaks all that apart? I think, though, like, that's where we have to, yeah, when we run out of words, we 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 have to reach for other tools in the tool chest.
Yeah, it's a great answer because it's like what I went through. I could have been a great photographer or whatever, pursued photography. It's like, I'm not gonna do that. Why should I freeze these moments that I gotta appreciate when they're live? And then it took me 60 years before I made a feature film. And I was like, I'm not gonna make a feature film. It's going on in my head all the time. Why would I ruin that? And I did. My first feature, my best critic said, it's the best film I never want to see again. So, um, 2 questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Is thinking a function of the soul? I don't know who I am. Mm, I don't know who I am without thinking. Like, at the point beyond thinking, things kind of turn into um, a more unified experience, and that, I think, is where some people see the soul is in, like, our identification with everything, um, which is kind of, I think, at that point where thinking falls apart. Um, so maybe there's a way in which it's not, but some people, I think, identify the soul as being that element that does individuate us from, you know, the unity. And in that sense, it would be thinking, because that is what, you know. how you identify yourself.
Pretty cool, dude. I recalled, I think it's Walt Whitman says, "I contain multitudes," and then,
Yes.
I think it's Jung or whoever said collective consciousness,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So the second Turing question is, can machines think?
They definitely seem to increasingly be able to make a pretty good simulation of thinking. Um, I think like we're starting to see the best AIs can create the illusion to humans. They seem to be passing Turing tests to some degree, where like I don't know if you saw the story about the Google employee recently who was working on an AI, and um, he kind of he came out and made some confidential information public because he was concerned that the AI was sentient. Um, and there's a whole discussion. There's one discussion which is the AI he was working on actually sentient? A lot of people seem to agree that it wasn't. But then there's a secondary, regardless of the answer to that question, there's another level there that I think is very fascinating, which is that at least one person whose job it was to work on these things was convinced that it was. So regardless of whether or not it is, it seems like these computers, a machine has gotten to the point where it can approximate thinking enough to fool a human being, or at least some human beings. Um, so yeah, I don't know the answer to that. That's a question I think that's going to end up being a one that we're going to have to grapple with over the next couple decades for sure.
Appreciate your honesty, Thomas, and just your down to earthness. Just because I'm asking this question doesn't mean you have to know an answer or even articulate an answer. But I like that fool human. This really smart literature woman in our reading groups, Finnegan's Wake and whatnot. She goes, "You're trying to trick me with these questions." I goes, "That's what language is. Everything is trying to trick
Yes.
you. Everything's a fool." And that Google employee thing is amazing because, yeah, as soon as we invented words, we were doing that, you
Yes.
know? And then if you study Bob Dobbs's, Android meme, which we could get into later, that's been around for many years. Okay, so, Thomas, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I think I think meaning, I would say, yeah.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
Um I don't know. Uh I would say I would say detecting, I think.
Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
If the pace of my answer to this question is any indication, light.
Now back to your word tools. I loved you brought that up before I did. Audre Lorde, the great poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded and said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest?
What new tool? I think wow, that's a tough one. I
And you could drop the word new if you want.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
And it doesn't have to be a tangible tool.
right, right. I think like I'll just go this was kind of the first the answer to my first question, and I'll reach back for this one because um I think it's the one that's been relevant to me, but also the one that I think is kind of counter cultural in this moment is um I labeled it then as like time and space, but
Yeah,
like being, I would maybe say, or just like presence,
yeah,
um, I think is something that's kind of counterfunctional to like a lot of the pressures of other tools that we're interacting with right now as a
yeah.
culture.
Like Ram Dass said, "Be here now." Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a name. Yeah. No, I get that. I just interviewed 2 days ago, a guy wrote songs with the Beach Boys and he goes, "Stillness." And, like, every answer was stillness. And it didn't matter. That was
Yeah.
the cool thing that he didn't am I repeating myself? Okay, what new toy do you suggest?
A good chair.
Oh my god, how beautiful is that? A good chair for a guy who sits at the internet all day. Do you stand up at the internet, or do you stand up at your laptop and edit, or do you always sit?
I tried a standing desk for years and I always found it kind of uncomfortable. So I
Yeah,
went back to sitting, and for years I had a terrible chair, and like it started to cause all kinds of problems. So in a practical sense, I got a better chair and that was a great investment. Um,
how cool.
but also, symbolically, I think, it goes back towards the stillness being answer and the sitting and
Yeah.
just being there.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
What I have to do the next day.
Next day, there's a practical person. Okay, so here we go. This is you touched on this. Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. So I mean by artists, filmmakers, painters, poets, the whole
Yeah.
musicians. Artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So I ask you, Thomas, the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I th I mean, I think in a lot of ways, it asks too much of us, or maybe not too much, but, like, we think it asks too much of us. Um, it feels like those those broadcasts, like, in the way in which they often challenge the status quo or normativity, I think, like, yeah, we're scared about what that means usually, and we're afraid of actually stepping outside of that comfortable space we've found.
Yeah. It's interesting you went from it asked, so you anthropomorphized it.
Sure.
So that's the android meme, by the way. But Robert Dobbs theorized that these hidden psychic effects, we start to imitate them. And so humans
Yes.
disappear, and it's just films talking to films, and
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
not even there anymore. I mean, it's just your video essays talking to
Right.
video essayists, and then there's no humans anymore.
Yeah.
But it asked too much. But then you went into scared and fear, which is the answer I get the most because we're
Mhm.
scared. Fear that. So, do artists have moral obligation?
Um, I would say as much as any human.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
New ideas.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Yeah. Um, the earliest memory I have some I'm pretty sure the earliest genuine memory I have is riding in a stroller out a drive, like a gravel driveway at the house my parents lived at, and I'm pretty sure that's my earliest memory. I have a few that kind of predate that, but they are all attached to photos that I've seen, and I don't think they're genuine memories. I think I just remember the photo. But
Yeah.
that memory of being in the stroller, there's no photo of it, but I have a sense memory of like being inside a stroller. I would
But
have been probably 3 years old, I think.
dude, this is amazing because, you know, one of McLuhan's favorite jokes is the woman's pushing her baby in a stroller down the street. Guy comes up and says, "What a lovely baby." And the mother goes, "You should see her picture." It's like you could just fill in your memory thing to that.
Yes.
You should see the memory. You should see the photographs I have of me in the stroller.
Yeah.
Thomas, is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think for me, a blessing. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's some people who would answer curse.
It's rare, but it's funny, you know, 80% say blessing, 20% say curse. So, tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Inside my immediate family, the first thing that comes to my mind is just my dad, who taught me how to just work, uh, and imbued me with a work ethic. Outside my immediate family, um, there's a lot of people I could point to. Somebody I would name would be Merlin Mann. He's a podcaster and like just an internet personality. Used to write about productivity as well too. He has one of the biggest productivity podcasts. But I started listening to him from a pretty young age, and he was just influential and kind of like mostly in like being representative of somebody who's uh was just existed online as a online personality, and that was a um his career, and that was kind of a new idea to me as a young person that kind of sparked something and made me interested in that kind of work.
Let's go back to your dad for a second. Where do you think your dad got his work ethic?
Probably from his father, who was Amish actually, before my dad was born. My dad was never Amish, but my grandparents were Pennsylvania Amish before. Um, so there's some interesting ancestry there with my relationship to technology and my interest in it, and the fact that I come from an ancestry that very much like rejects technology. But another hallmark of that culture is just like a really intense work ethic.
Yeah, but they don't reject technology
That's
necessarily.
true.
Yeah, and it's very funny how that they are, but, you know, it's funny because what's your dad's career?
He works in the shed business, so he builds and hauls like storage sheds for people.
Yeah. So, if you I really love to probe the work ethic with people because it's such a scam in some ways because
Yes.
it's like it about the 3rd paragraph in Wikipedia for work ethic, it says, "This could be a scam by consumer culture."
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so long as you're having fun. Did they raise you a particular religion?
Yes. Yeah. I grew up like Protestant, kind of non-denominational evangelical Christian.
Do you pray?
Yeah, probably not as much as I should.
That's good. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Um, Welcome home.
Oh, that is so good. I went to, Charles Brown's funeral service, great jazz and blues singer, and Solomon Burke ran it. It's like everybody was there, Little Richard, Bonnie Raitt, everybody, and he goes, "There's no crying because we're celebrating a homegoing."
Yes. Yeah.
A homegoing. That was Welcome home. Okay, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Um, yeah, I would say I think it uses people. It infects people. But there's definitely a point at which that infection becomes so deep where it feels like the two are inseparable and like the person is evil.
Yeah. Here's the hidden question there really is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Thomas, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah, I think that's especially relevant to um our modern age and discourse on the internet. There's a lot of ways in which I think attention kind of fuels a certain attention is a fuel in a way that we often don't acknowledge. And a lot of times it's better to just leave things alone than it is um to do what we perceive as fighting the enemy. You know, often gets caught up in this sort of cycle of amplification. So I definitely think there's something to that where, um, you know, ignoring is often far more productive than fighting, I think. Um, that obviously doesn't work in every case because not every enemy is one you can just walk away from or, you know, not respond to. But on the internet, often that is the case. Um, Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I personally really like the ideal that Christ set forth of like loving your enemy is to heap coals in their head. So there's a sense in which um you know, kindness towards your enemy um is actually kind of like a rebellious act. But, in practicality, I think that's really hard to embody, and you also have to be aware of your own n w I'll put it this way, that might be the ideal that Christ embodied, but none of us are Christ, so we can't enact that as perfectly as he may, and we might need to be more aware of the necessity to protect ourselves from other people just walking all over us and damaging us.
Does punishment work?
Um, I don't know. I would imagine in some scenarios probably. Depends on what your goals are. There's definitely been times where I haven't done certain things in my life because I was afraid of being punished or was avoiding punishment. So if you're just trying to just get a group of people to not do a thing, um, punishment can definitely be a at least a short term solution sometimes. But if you have longer term goals like, you know, empowering people to be able to make choices for themselves about what is right and wrong, then I think you need something more nuanced and complicated than punishment usually.
Yeah, the Smartest Guys in the Room documentary where the all the Enron bad guys got their hands slapped and put into country club jails. I went up to the producer and I says, "So is your film just like a a guidebook for up and coming capitalists?" And he goes,
Yes, yeah.
"It could be." He didn't even deny it, you know?
Yeah.
But it's funny because Nassim Taleb has an amazing quote. He says, games were created to give non heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who a hero is and who is not. So that's a lot to think about. But someone responded about this punishment in this whole thing about winning and losing. They said villains don't think they are bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Any thoughts on any of that I just said?
That the bit about heroes not thinking that they're bad especially resonates with me. I think you do yourself a huge disservice when you imagine that your enemy is being evil for evil's sake, and kind of knows it. I think like you'll have a much better chance of understanding your adversary if you put yourself in their shoes and imagine that they believe that what they're doing is right. Yeah, that's the initial thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. Thomas, this is funny because you've been really patient. One filmmaker, I started asking him all these questions. He goes, "Aren't you going to ask me about film?"
This is what film's about. Film is
Yeah, exactly. You get it.
I find film interesting because film is about life.
Yeah,
And
exactly. So that leads into James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He run Volta Cinema and he basically said, "I'm out of here. This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I think, you know, we become blind to things in life. It's really easy to stop seeing things. um we're trapped within a certain perspective, and it's very easy to fall into certain ruts and patterns and start seeing things in certain ways. And I think the beauty of cinema or theater or literature or any art in general is that it can kind of open up a portal into another perspective. um and it doesn't always. It's like it depends on the artist. It depends on the viewer being receptive and being willing to participate and enter into that thing, but it can. And I, at least for me, there's been times where, you know, even if it's the world recontextualized, that lens opens things up, and then I can go back out into the world and see the tree that was always there in a new way. There's a book called Overstory by Richard Powers. He lives not far from here, in the mountains of Western North Carolina, and the book is about. It's a novel about a bunch of people. It has kind of an ensemble cast. It covers a long period of time, but the thing that ties all the characters together is trees. And uh, he talks about the American chesswood and the death of the American chesswood, and trees just connect all these characters. I read that book in 2020, right after I moved here to Asheville, which is among the mountains near where he would have written that book. Um, and I have seen trees differently ever since I read that book. Trees have always been there in my life, but I have a deeper, greater appreciation for the beauty of the story connected to trees and how our lives as humans relate to them. I think that's the power of those kinds of things to illuminate life.
So well put, because it wasn't no Terrence Malick shot into the trees with the sun flickering through. It took a literature, it took a book.
Yes, yeah.
I gotta tell you a Terrence Malick story that you'll love, but really quick, what you really evoked with that was Auden the poet said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. Because you really said it well. It does not always,
Right.
you know,
Yes.
but Bertolt Brecht says, I want art that, activates you, don't put you in a trance. It's like, well, some stuff that puts you in a trance, like Terrence trying to be Kubrick, can
Yeah.
activate you. It can lead to that. So
Yeah.
it's the key word in the audience is the mystery of art that we don't know if it activates you. But you love this, right down the street from where I live is a great poetry center beyond Baroque. And Terrence Malick was shooting that LA film, and he scouted it as a location. And the director of the director and me are good buds of talking about film. And he walks into this room, and how Terrence is, no one knows,
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
doesn't want to. He walks right up to Richard and he goes, Terrence Malick. He puts his hand out and says, Terrence Malick, like, the opposite of what we think of, like, oh, I love
Right.
that shot where you go, watch this kid. The guy is not supposed to get get over there,
Yeah.
So what was your tipping point? You grow up watching films on what? Streaming or in movie theaters, and then you go, "Hey, I wanna do that." You start making I know you reviewed a lot of this in your video, so we don't have to hang around, but where was the tipping point where you says, "I wanna do that"? What was you s and then what was the tipping point when you say, "I wanna be a video essayist"? Was it seeing that guy Merlin Man that made you wanna be it? So just there are 2
Yeah.
tipping points for those 2, yeah.
The tipping point for my interest in film came pretty early on, and I actually had a weird entry into it. I think, I already mentioned kind of my conservative upbringing, and a part of that was we didn't have TV in the house. Um, my parents were. I didn't watch R-rated movies until I was, pretty old. So I didn't really grow up with this kind of like nostalgia romanticized like view of cinema that I think a lot of people who get into film have. Um, I was more interested in it on a nerdy technical level. I had a little video camera when I was young. But anyway, if I can point to a tipping point with that, I'll say the Lord of the Rings movies were um, ones that I really enjoyed. But almost beyond that, there were excellent behind the scenes documentaries that really went in depth into Peter Jackson's process
Right.
making those films.
So just to say, did you see Lord of the Rings in the big screen, then you rented the DVD, or then you got a DVD and saw how'd you see
Yes.
the docs? That's how you did it. You went big
Yeah, yeah.
screen, and then you learned docs on the making. Yeah.
I saw the docs, and then I just got obsessed with any kind of
Yeah.
director's commentary behind. I was almost like more obsessed with behind the scenes
Yeah.
material than I was with cinema itself.
Yeah,
And
when DVDs first came out, my friend go, "Jerry, you're gonna love this because you're gonna be able to watch the directors talk." I goes, "I don't even wanna waste my life watching the film, let alone watch." And then eventually I go to the library and I just watch the director commentaries.
Yeah.
Okay, you covered a lot of this in your past videos, but now the tipping point for video essayists, was it Merlin Man or was it something else? Or
So
is that it, the docs?
no, so because of the docs, I got interested in filmmaking and photography and kind of the technical craft of filmmaking, and I was pursuing that. I ended up working for a video production company as like an editor, and so I was just pursuing it mostly as a craft, not really as like an art. Um, and then in basically because I wanted to become better at the craft, I was like, well, I should get serious about like watching the best of the craft and studying it so that I can become a better craftsman and make the best stuff. And that was when I started kind of quote unquote taking cinema more seriously. And in that process of just exploring, trying to find the best it had to offer, really fell in love with it. Um, and that kind of coincided. It was like not long after that channels like Every Frame a Painting were cropping up, and the video essay form was really starting to blossom on the internet. And I had opinions about movies, and I was a video editor, and I was just seeing some of those videos and thinking to myself like, oh, I could make one of those.
Yeah.
So it was a very practical, just like, I think I
Yeah.
could do that, so why not
Why
try?
not? That's super cool. And so a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're making something like Labyrinth Ion?
I think I think intention is important, but I think it's a little naive to assume we always creators always know what their intentions are. Like, I think there's multiple levels of intention. There's an explicit conscious intention of what you're trying to do, and then there's deeper levels of intention that kind of come through any art, whether the artist wants it to or not. Um, and I think both of those things, and especially the relationship between both of them, are interesting. So when I'm approaching something, I have my ideas of what I want something to be, but especially with something like Labyrinth Ion, where it's tipping more into the abstract or experimental. Um, I'm trying to kind of let go of those, like, more
Yeah,
intellectual conceptions and fall into something that's a little bit more like an intuitive intention. Um, but then I think, like, also, I think there's a process of letting even that go as you're giving it away to the world,
yeah.
um, and just allowing it to become what it is for others.
Beautiful. So others you led perfectly into. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your viewer when you're making Labyrinth Ion?
With something like Labyrinth Ion, I think, I mean, there's always a viewer in my mind, especially as an editor. I think that's the process in which, like, in editing, very practically, you are both sort of a creator and a viewer in a very um, cyclical process as you're doing the work. You can when you're practicing filmmaking as a cinematographer or as a director or as a performer or whatever, out in the field, there's elements of you're trying to embody a viewer in a sense. You're maybe looking at the screen, um, but you're not experiencing the film in the way it's going to be experienced in the final form. Um, but when you're editing, I think a lot of times you really are trying to. You're trying, at the very least, you're trying to feel it in the rhythm that people are going to feel the film in when they're watching it. Um, so I do think, like, for me as an editor, there's a constant attempt to be embodying, like, the viewer and experiencing what I'm editing in the way that the viewer is experiencing it. Um, but I would also draw a distinction between that and imagining an audience for the film, like having an ideal audience that I think is going to be viewing this and getting something out of it. It's more of like an attempt to disconnect myself from the creative act and understand how it's going to be perceived once I'm done with it. If I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that made a lot of sense. You're really articulate, and I appreciate it. I appreciate your video essays, and in that regard, McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, whether it's tangible, fin, our teeth, the shutter in a camera, or maybe your editing button extends our eyelid. Maybe religion or philosophy is an extension of consciousness. It doesn't have to be tangible. What does the video essay, what humanness does it extend for you? He called it human sensorium. You know what I'm saying? Humanness. What
Right.
humanness is extended by the video essay?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, I think of uh, the work that I do as an extension of, like, that impulse we have to converse. about art after we consume it. You know, the moments after you walk, if you go see a film in the cinema with a group of friends, the moment, you know, there's a few moments where people might stay silent for a little while as they're mulling things over, but inevitably there will be a moment where the conversation turns towards what did we just watch and what do we all think about that?
Yeah.
Um, and I think like video essay is just a very like it's just a very slickly packaged form of extending that into the internet, you know, for people to consume and participate in.
It's like date talk. It's the
Yeah,
way you
yeah.
go on a date. You take it a film so you can really talk about it. It's really good. Yeah, because McLuhan has a great line, you know, everybody says, "Well, what does film extend?" And they go, "Memory or vision." And he goes, "It extends the foot." 'Cause you travel. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
no-brainer. He also said there's no such thing as a good or bad film, it's a good or a bad viewing experience. Any comment?
That makes me think of Werner Herzog talking about the fact that he barely watches anything, and some of his favorite things to watch are uh, Keeping Up with the Kardashians and WrestleMania.
Oh my
Um,
god.
I think about that sometimes. There's times where I'll watch, you know, even what we would think of as very lowbrow, like reality
Yeah,
television, and given the right lens, anything can be seen with a very just like things speak deeply about humanity,
yeah,
everything. And uh and if you're willing to engage with something in a certain way, even the
yeah.
the worst things have something to kind of teach us about ourselves.
Yeah, that's Finnegan's Wake all the way. That's Tom Anderson, Cal Arts professor, telling me David Lynch says, "Even if you're watching a bad film, you can look at the lamps." It's like, "Give me a break." But yeah, don't get me started on Herzog either. I'm glad you brought him up. But Peter Greenaway, now there's an intelligent filmmaker. There's a guy who could talk about film. Said that cinema. I'm very curious about your take on him because when I asked Herzog this question, he started dissing Peter Greenaway, and it was like, dude, just stay on the question. Peter Greenaway said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Now, this is you touched on this almost in your great thoughts on Malick and Lynch. And, you know, it's a moving image art form. It's only
Yeah.
130 years and it's been hijacked by shooting um, theater. And Peter said, Marty's not doing anything different than D.W. Griffith did. They're just making movies of a theater piece. So, anyways, we know that's debatable, but this whole idea cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? And it's a stupid question. I don't have it worded well, but it's like if you ever watch Tony Conrad's The Flicker, it's 15 minutes of black and white flickering. Now
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
not per se telling a story, but me and you could watch it and have a story go through our head.
Yes, yeah.
And you know, Andrew Noren says if you put one frame after another, that is storytelling. But you get the sense of the question, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting sort of debate, I guess, would be like, you know, is the avant-garde the experimental, like is that is that doing something else or is that just a different form of storytelling? Uh, for some people, like it almost seems like it really isn't. Like there's people who look at that stuff and they're like they don't see anything, um, which is kind of fascinating to me. Um, but I like I think like with something like Labyrinth Ion, which isn't even that in my mind, it's like it's pretty abstract, but like I think that's a story. I think it's a story. Um, and so I think I would fall on that side of things, you know, whether or not yeah, I don't know. I think our conceptions of storytelling are often pretty narrow, like what it can be, what constitutes storytelling are probably narrower than they need to be. um but I think I get this spirit of the Greenaway quote of being like there is something more there that we can reach for beyond just like, telling us, if you reduce story down to like, hey, we've got 3 acts and we've got
Yeah,
characters with, we have all these beats and the structure and these elements that you need to have in order for it to be a story, quote unquote. If that's what you're labeling as story, we can definitely go beyond that. um
yeah,
but I think, yeah, I would probably fall on the side of, I think it's more productive to just like try to open up our idea of what a story is.
yeah. No, I'm impressed, Thomas, because you're really tuned to, let's say, mainstream cinema. I mean, even Malick and Lynch are mainstream in a way. And you look at your list and then you do something on postmodern advertising, goes, what is this kid? It's so easy to love Malick when everybody else goes, what the fuck is this?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it is cool that you have this sense because, you know, Kubrick, that's why Nolan is a Kubrick wannabe, because Kubrick put an experimental abstract animation in the middle of 2001 and it helps tell the story.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
like mind blowing. People don't realize that because you could enter that in an experimental animation festival, the Stargate sequence with nothing else, and they'd go, oh, yeah, this is just a
Right.
flickering light.
Yeah.
And so it is amazing how Kubrick had that sense, and he got it from Jordan Belson. He admitted, you know, and Stanley said, "Why'd you make 2001?" He says to convolate Marshall McLuhan. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
That's
and then
amazing.
and then he
Yeah.
invited Marshall to the first private screening, or one of the first, and Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes.
That's great.
But anyways,
Yeah.
anyways, we should do a whole salon on Kubrick and Wells and all the guys. But
Yeah.
but I wanted to ask you this one that was really well put, because Greenaway's still bitching. He was just in LA, still bitching about how cinema, and how he told us once at a live lecture many years ago. He said, cinema is this long, literature is this long. If Finnegan's Wake is the epitome of literature, there's nothing that's come close in film, you know. But I have some that, are possible, but it is interesting to think, could cinema ever reach what Finnegan's Wake did in literature? So we can only try. It's like Sidney Lumet. They asked him, can films do anything? And he goes, no, but it ain't gonna keep me from trying. Because he
Yeah.
was a socially aware, he wanted to tackle social subject.
Yeah.
So another guy who did this pretty good, Michael Apted, documentarian, and he made Coal Miner's Daughter. This was 40 years ago. I asked him, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France. But it really flourished in the 80s because of MTV. Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So Michael Apted said, well, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this with a bias. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think there might be something to that. And to expound upon it, I would say like I I've thought a lot about sort of like film grammar and how there genuinely seems to be things which audiences um, accept now, like shorthand that develops for certain things that audiences will accept and understand now, that if you look back into film history, it didn't seem like those things existed within the conventionality. I'm trying to think of a good example of this. I can't off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
there's examples of this, how the grammar evolves in such a way. um, and so I do think there's there are trends over time where, if you grow, especially for people who grew up watching television or visual media, not that you can't adopt that kind of media literacy later in life, but there's an innate sense of like understanding the language that I think allows you to maybe like take in what is being conveyed at uh in a more complex way. That's my feeling. It
Yeah.
could just be that those are the trends, and that really has no bearing. Like if you plucked somebody out of 1920 and showed them like, you know, certain films from now, they might be I mean, there would be other reasons why they would be difficult for them to comprehend, but
Yeah.
like the visual grammar of them might not be, actually
Yeah.
challenging. So yeah, I don't know. I definitely would make room for that just being an illusion. Uh,
It's beautiful. Can humans literally multitask?
that I don't think so. I think we can definitely reach a state in which we're shifting our attention between certain things at such great speeds that maybe, you know, it appears to us there's an illusion that we are perceiving multiple things at once. Um, but I don't think attention can actually be split in that kind of way.
Dude, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. This is really fun, Thomas. And just an aside, really quick, what's Lynch's best film? Eraserhead? In?
That I mean, that's
You sort of said that in one of your things.
yeah, I mean, that's my I would definitely say that's my favorite. I feel like,
Okay, leave it at that. So
yeah.
when Blue Velvet came out, because I showed you should hear my history of showing Eraserhead. It goes on and on, but actually, I'll tell you really quick. So I'm showing films in Ann Arbor, Michigan from like a college campus from 1972 to 1980. We go to the Village Voice to see like what's the cool titles. There's this film Eraserhead showing all the time. Then I get this book that says jazz music and films. And it had an insert page and it said Fats Waller is in Eraserhead. And I goes, I love Fats Waller. I got to show this film. Having no idea what Eraserhead is. We got the
Yeah.
16 millimeter print. We watched it before we showed it to our audience. We went, holy fuck. But we already had this consciousness because the Ann Arbor Film Festival is the longest running experimental film festival in the world. And so then I go to Flint, Michigan, my hometown, and Michael Moore is showing films there. And we talk for a couple minutes. And I says, you should show this film called Eraserhead. So I recommended, it's like one of my cool things I could say. I recommended Michael Moore as a film curator to show Eraserhead.
Nice.
Then Blue Velvet comes out and everybody goes, this is great. And I goes, that's nothing. Eraserhead's way better. And people watch it, and after 20 minutes of Eraserhead, they go, nothing happened.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is. But there's this, and you were talking about like tropes. We get tuned in, like Lily Tomlin says, reality is just a collective hunch. We're just collectively agreeing that words work or that cinema tropes work. But how do you acquire this taste? So my friend says the three elements of music are theory, technique, and taste. So, theory, you're doing that well. You're studying the theory of film. Technique, you know which buttons to push. You edit, blah, blah, blah. How does one acquire taste? Like in why
Yeah.
you grab in Malik and not towards, Godard and Chris Marker?
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I love that analogy because I think I love the analogy of taste when we apply it to art, because I think how it works with food is so incredibly analogous. Like I when you're a kid, if you first try red wine or something, I mean, some children might take to it, but usually your first reaction is like, this is gross. A lot of the things that adults come to appreciate as some of the best flavors, the best tastes that there are in food, are things that children, reflexively seem to have an aversion to. And if you think about the process of entering into adulthood and acquiring those tastes, it's a process of experimentation. It's a process of being open to new things, of like sipping black coffee and being like, that's nasty and bitter, but then like going back to it and wondering like, is there a reason that, is there something here that I'm missing? Is there a reason why this is something that's appreciated? Um, and so, yeah, I think it was, a lot of it was just having a kind of innate curiosity. I always wanted to know what the boundaries of cinema were, and so I was always interested in finding the um, looking towards the edges, and that's a rabbit hole that you go down incredibly quickly. And there was times I would bump into things and I would be like, I don't get this, or I've rewatched things now. I'm not that old, I'm like 20. I'm 29 now, but even now, there's things that I watch that I first saw, a decade ago, that I'm like, oh, I can now understand this in a way that I wasn't I was nowhere near equipped to comprehend as an 18-year-old, or, even a 22-year-old or whatever. Um, and some of that is like age and experience that allows you to have a perspective on something, but some of that is I just needed to like have experienced more of what cinema had to offer, and then be able to go back to that thing and be like, okay, now I understand. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think I To say one last thing about that, I think like the relationship between your initial reaction to something and sort of like your initial r-
Yeah.
response as a consumer of art, and like how you think about it over time and place a value on it, is is an important relationship to think about.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who they want to just immediately like stick those two things together and kind of
Yeah.
like put a certain piece of art to rest, like, oh, I saw it, I had this reaction, that's how I feel, that's whether that like that's how I determine whether it's good or bad, and I don't need to think about it again. um
Yeah, no,
and
that was really good because you said good words, Thomas. You're a real wordsmith. You said experience, experimenting, being open. Most
yes.
people say, how do you acquire taste? Exposure. And it is funny. That's the gut feeling. It's your intuition, because we used to call what you were leaning towards at the end as guilty pleasures. What is the
Right.
great film? What's David Lynch? No, what's Herzog's guilty pleasures? Wrestling. Oh, okay. Well, he doesn't even feel guilt, but it is like, you know so and the other thing you really did in bringing up the word taste was Billy Wilder. He says, I just hope they think my film's as good as the popcorn. I mean, that is the
Yeah,
bottom line,
right.
So what do you think the motive of the cave artist was? Not what Herzog said, because he ripped off a New Yorker article on his film, which is a good film about cave art, or what anthropology, but what's your hunch? What was the motive of the cave artist?
I think it's the same as mm, I'm gonna make some really sweeping claims, but here goes. uh, Maybe I'll take this back eventually at some point in my life, but I think it's the same as what the project of art is broadly, which is um, to create a monument to our own being, or
Yeah,
not our own being, but being.
monument to being. That's
Yeah,
good. That's, McLuhan's favorite line is, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can.
yeah,
So that's the perfect intro to this one. George Manupelli, who started the Ann Arbor Film Festival over 60 years ago. Pretty amazing that a festival's half the age of the medium, and it's experimental.
yes.
His mantra was, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. It's a stupid question. I know it's both. It depends. But basically, is art making, filmmaking, video essay making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, culture, environments are dominant?
I do, yeah. Which is more, because they definitely stick out to me as modes that I feel like I'm operating in at different times. Um.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
wait,
don't.
wait, Thomas. You're like, I love that you listen well. Because one woman said, the word more doesn't function in your question. Because that, of course it's both, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, it's just you're leaning. What is it a little more? And it's really just a jumping off point to talk about
Yeah.
vehicle.
I think I think it's more self-expression, but what I would add to that is that especially when I'm thinking about making anything that I would consider art, uh, I think I'm generally striving more for that sense of channeling something.
Yeah. Can art making be egoless?
That goes back to, I forget what the question was, but I talked a little bit about what we were talking about, the soul, and kind of, if art is this expression of being, there's a sense in which on one hand that kind of identifies with like the unity, like ultimate being, the being of all things and everyone, and that is a very egoless endeavor. But there is also an element of it that is like trying to then identify yourself as separate from that,
Yeah.
um, as existing separate from that, and that is, I mean, that's maybe what ego is, potentially. Um, so, yeah,
Well,
I
that's
don't know
good.
the answer
That's
there.
good. No, that's good. 80, no, 90% of people, can art be egoless? They'd say no. Then someone came along and says, great art is egoless. And then a couple weeks ago, someone said, it should be egoless. Because, I mean, to me, anybody watching Tree of Life could just transcend and go, this is beautiful.
Yeah,
But some people go, what is this? It's
yeah, yeah.
pretentious. Yeah, because you're fucking brainwashed that movies are supposed to be a certain way. Get over it. And so, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
Wow. Conviction. That's my gut. I don't know.
That's fine. You've accomplished a lot, man. You get a whole lot of, you make your, I mean, maybe this is too personal. Can you make your living being a video essayist?
Yeah, well, definitely as a YouTuber.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that's enough. You've accomplished a lot. These three elements, rate them in your accomplishments: luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Um, l- whew, s- I would say ambition, then wow. I often think that luck is underrated in terms of success, that because of survivorship bias, a lot of people tend to underrate luck, because it's the thing we least want to identify with, um, when talking about our own success most of the time. So I feel that impulse a little bit now, and I think I would put luck probably in the middle.
And
So
then
my
skill. Yeah, that's because people want to be humble and they don't want to say skill first. But check this out, Thomas. You'll love this. The question used to be for 25 years: Is ambition based more on fear or joy? And everybody go fear. And that was too simple.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I read Friedkin, who's a really articulate filmmaker. I've seen him speak. He's a great guy, great speaker too. He says, in Hollywood, skill and luck have nothing to do with it. It's all ambition. So you would have loved your answer, ambition. Is perception reality?
No.
Why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless?
I think because, I mean, that's a very daunting possibility and painful one for a lot of people. I think, like,
Yeah.
uh, there's we want meaning for some reason, and
Yeah, that's another hardwired question. For some reason, hey, it's hardwired in me.
yeah.
Okay, Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. I definitely think
Just name one off the top of your head.
one impossible thing I believe in. I mean, there's definitely, like, that's a tough one, because I think, like, the things that I believe in that are really probably impossible, I think I might not know that they're impossible.
Well,
Um,
just name one. That's good if you don't know that. I mean, just
I mean, well, I guess, like, to piggyback off the last question, I think I definitely believe in meaning in some way,
yeah,
in a grand narrative, and I think, like, but the postmodernists resonate with me in a lot of ways, a lot of times, and there's definitely a part of me that thinks that might be an impossibility.
yeah. Tell me one major element of your video essay making that stayed the same and one major element that's changed. How many years have you gone with it about?
It's almost 6 years exactly. Yeah.
Okay, 6 years. What's one thing that stayed the same and one thing that's changed?
Um, I think that the element that's definitely stayed the same is that I, uh, I have always just been talking about th the things that the movies and television, the media that interests me.
Yeah,
Um, that's where it started, and that's the kind of the thread that I've been more or less trying to follow. Um, I think the thing that's changed more recently is, uh, I've increasingly, I think, opened myself up to, like, talking about more than cinema through the
yeah.
the ideas present within, it's like I'm yeah, I don't know, but that impulse
No,
was there
that's
at the
good.
beginning, but I think I'm getting better at doing that.
Yeah. No, that's good. You said it's life. So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're talking overcome. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
A weakness I turned into a strength. I uh I've never been diagnosed with ADHD, but I have a lot of the markers of it, and grew up with, just, like, had a terrible time, like, focusing on things, and was just, like, really, scatterbrained and specifically had the element of, hyper focusing on a
Yeah,
specific topic or idea for a short period of time very intensely and then moving on to something else. And I always
yeah.
thought that was a weakness for a very long time until I essentially discovered / lucked into a way to collect a bunch of interests and incorporate them all together and remix them. And I found a form of
Yeah.
expression of work that allows me to utilize that as a skill.
Dude, did they maybe it's too personal, but did they med you? Did they say you gotta have meds?
No, I was never diagnosed or medicated. I was homeschooled, which I think helped a lot because I wasn't my my mom who schooled me was really good about just kind of letting me learn in the way that I think like was comfortable for me, and I wasn't forced to try to have to fit into um, another way of learning.
Tell her she did a great job. I mean, really, it's amazing that you didn't get med because I mean, I was hyperactive as a kid and they didn't med me. Thank God, because they probably would have if I lived, a couple generations later. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When it speaks truth to power.
Nice.
Yeah.
You create what you resist. This is a saying I'd love to hear your reaction to. I'm going to suss it out with Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, says, "You are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated in the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So this line, you create, and I'm not saying, Thomas, you create what you resist. I'm saying one creates what's one. Just this idea, you create what you resist. Any comment on that line?
Uh, yeah, I think to reach back to the thing we talked about with Alan Watts and attention, I think this is really important on the internet right now. Where we direct our attention, attention amplifies, and often we direct our attention at things that we despise or do not like. Um, I think the idea you're pointing to is maybe a little bit more broad and complex than that, but I think that's
Yeah.
definitely an element. Um,
Yeah. I mean, Louis Buñuel had it. I mean, that's what made up all his films was same with Zappa, the same thing. They're always bitching about what they were raised with, and that gives them content. The big word for your generation, we need content. So narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. It's the great experimental filmmaker Hollis Frampton. Can you forget to die?
we're definitely all trying.
We're all trying. Dude, you don't know how many people don't say yes. I mean, 90% of people say no, you can't forget to die. So to say you think we're all trying, that's beautiful. Okay, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh, I would definitely say that I would not have to stress out about a lot of things that I stressed out about for uh, probably 15 years. That I should just like relax a little bit.
Yeah.
I was a very intense teenager.
How do you find peace of mind?
uh, Going into nature.
Dude, that's like 98% of people say nature. It's amazing. Okay, back to Alan Watts. 5 Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. Who started it all?
The Tao,
Are we going to make it?
hopefully.
Where do we put it?
back where it came from.
Nice. I've never had that answer. Back where it came from. 4, who's cleaning it up?
We are.
Is it serious?
Yes. And yes.
Well, Frank Zappa said it best, I think. He says, "I'm very serious about being not serious."
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
The most
go ahead.
important thing is to be able to not take it so seriously.
Yeah, it's very important. That's Captain Beefheart said, "The stars are matter, we are matter, but it doesn't matter." Okay, should toilet paper come off the roll over or under?
Over.
Why?
That's the way I do it.
Good answer. That's the way the patent has it. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Um, I want to say, well, oh man, that's way too ambitious for an autobiography of my life. That and then maybe I have
Well,
this.
say
I
it
had
say it anyways. Say it.
on Cinema's grave.
That's fine. Let's leave it at that on cinema. That's perfect for Godard, man. I was gonna quote this Godard quote too. I mean, on Cinema's grave is perfect. Now they want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Nostalgia.
Oh my God. I never get that. That's what you call a metaphor, right? You know all these cute aphorisms. If you study McLuhan, like you quote Postman. I don't know how much you study McLuhan, but McLuhan, he knew the point of aphorisms is not to say them. You can say them and appreciate them, but it's to reinvent them. So Browning says, our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is heaven for? And McLuhan reworded it as, our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is a metaphor?
Right. Yes.
Okay, Thomas, a few more and we're out of here. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
I would really prefer never nobody ever built a statue of me. So I
Okay,
would say
that's fine.
underground made out of rock.
That's good. Underground rocks. Okay. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Something good I never had and I never want is uh a the life of a I'm trying to think of the right word, but like the life of a monk.
Yeah, the life of a monk. That's
Yeah.
good. It's good you never had it and you never want it. You know who did that? You must know Koyaanisqatsi.
Yes, yeah.
You know that guy who made it? What's his name? Reggio?
Yeah. Hmm.
He went and didn't talk for 10 years.
Oh wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he's an amazing guy because he basically went to Canyon Cinema, watched all their experimental films, and ripped off Hillary Harris and goes, I can do this. So everybody who went to the Ann Arbor Film Festival for years, when we saw that on a big movie screen in a popcorn theater, we went, dude, we've seen this for years, but how did he get it in the movie theater? And all experimental filmmakers make their living teaching, and he reinvented it. He sold his footage to FedEx commercials. I mean, what's wrong with that? He did,
Yeah.
So The Life of a Monk, that's pretty good. That's also Leonard Cohen. So, if you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Uh, I would probably I wouldn't know what to do, so it would just hit me. I would just take it.
That's good. I wouldn't know what to do. That is a really valid. That's really good. So, I never ask people this question anymore, but since you're so well versed in film, this is Stan Brakhage introduced Tarkovsky at Telluride in '83. He says, I personally think the three greatest tasks for film in the 20th century are: one, to make the epic that tells the tale of the tribes of the world; two, to keep it personal, because only in the eccentricities of our personal lives do we have any chance at the truth; three, to do the dream work, that is to illuminate the borders of the unconscious. Any comments, and more so, what are your 21st century updates? So what? This old fart says this. What can we do? How can we take cinema farther? Any aspirations?
I think maybe the only update that I would throw onto there is that I think cinema is also potentially a really interesting tool for exploring the future. Um, I think sci-fi is kind of an underrated genre. It tends to be a more like populist, um, pop blockbuster genre. Uh, but I think there's really interesting things there. One of my favorite movies of all time is Blade Runner, um, and I think the way in which, a lot of that credit obviously goes to some extent to Philip K. Dick and his material, but I think there's a way in which those images seep um, into our collective consciousness about the future,
Yeah.
um, that that definitely impacts our thinking. So I don't think it's just about the past. Um, but I would say, I mean, those don't need too much updating because I kind of agree, and I think we're still
Yeah.
hacking away at trying to fulfill that dream.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. And Brackage came right out of Gertrude Stein. He's a lit guy. But I got to tell you, The Matrix, which you probably consider Matrix pretty, like the T-shirt I saw at a Black Lives Matter, it said, The Matrix was a documentary. No, The Matrix is a documentary. Have you ever seen that T-shirt?
No, I
And you
haven't.
know who's the star of The Matrix? How do you pronounce his name?
Keanu Reeves.
He came into this bookstore I worked with and bought all the McLuhan books as soon as The Matrix came out
Yes.
because he knew there was something going on. But what you
Well,
said, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, like, Baudrillard, Jean Baudrillard, who
Yeah,
wrote Simulacra and
yeah.
Simulation. I've been reading that recently. That was a big touchstone for The Matrix. He loved McLuhan, and I'm gonna butcher the quote, but he says something in there about McLuhan and the medium is the message, that like we're still grappling with that, and we'll
Oh, yeah.
something to the extent of, I'm paraphrasing, but we are still grappling with that specific insight from McLuhan, and will be for a long time, and we haven't neither pushed it to its ultimate extreme or grappled with what it means to when we do that. And I think
Yeah,
that's absolutely true.
totally. And the New York Times just tried to grapple with it 2 weeks ago with a huge article on McLuhan, and they got half right. It's just like half, like McLuhan said, a half a truth is still a lot of a truth. But Chris Marker said it the best. He said, I abandoned Gutenberg for McLuhan years ago. But going back to your future thing, because the fourth step, and that was beautiful that you, being younger, could say, "No, let's explore the future," because D.W. Griffith said 100 years ago, in 2024, that's in 2 years, he predicted that cinema would end warfare. It's like, what a prediction.
Yeah.
Just to have the balls to do that for a guy who made, uh, you know, Birth of a Nation.
Right.
Well, a couple more and we're out of here. This has really been fun. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
The cultural shift that inspires me is, I would say a greater awareness of the, like, uh, the environment, the globe, our impact on
Yeah,
an individual's existence within a larger system, and the growing awareness of those things, um, is a shift that,
yeah,
I think just having that awareness is not the whole picture. It doesn't immediately solve the problem, but or the problems. I mean, that arguably some of which are insolvable, but it encourages me that there's a at least greater language for, like, understanding and discussing those things now.
yeah. Because you work in media literacy, and when the thing that impressed me in your bio is when you said media ecology. I goes, "What's this film guy saying media ecology?" Well, most people don't know ecology is the organism's relationship with its environment. It's just not saving the whales. Most people think ecology means save their Mother Earth. So really good. Two more, we're out of here. Thornton Wilder, 1928. Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Thomas, you laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
I would say, I think acceptance, being able to accept ourselves, and yeah, acceptance.
Yeah, it's a great word. Yeah, because I say it's about acknowledgement. You're walking down the street, and is
Right.
it that hard? Is it that hard to just nod your head or say hello? I mean,
Yeah.
people don't do that. It's like, you know. Anyways, acceptance is you accept yourself. It's really the great Eden Abe, the first hippie, wrote a song called Nature Boy. And it says the greatest lesson you'll ever learn is to love and be loved in return.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to love. Yeah. So, the last question? What a really great time, Thomas. Really learned a
Yeah, this
lot.
has been great.
Really
Appreciate it.
love it. What gives you the most optimism?
Uh, you know, again, I'm not that old, but I find seeing young people who are doing very cool and interesting things
Yeah.
is such, like, such a neat feeling that I didn't, like, I never th I don't know, I never thought that, I never imagined that as a part of adulthood, but, like,
Yeah.
it is kind of, there's this exciting sensation of, like, there's, uh there's another group of people who are younger than me that maybe I don't completely understand, and there's things happening there that I'm no longer in touch with. But sometimes I look over there and it looks like they're doing something really interesting or exciting or new, and that gives me a sense of hope.
Yeah. Dude, this has been a true delight, and I really learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. And that's the answer I get 95% of the time. What gives you the most optimism? Youth. I got the questions last question. One of the last questions they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. They says, "What gives you the most optimism?" He says, "Other people." And he spent his life. But I want to end with this great quote. All the Jean-Luc Godard quotes, because I really want to encourage you to join our live Zoom salon on Godard in about a week. I'll send you the details. It'll be so good. Even if you don't know anything about Godard, you could brush up from in a couple quickie video essays and be able to join us, old farts. So here's what one of his quotes, the LA Times quote, printed, not all the typical ones. Godard, he who jumps into the void owes no explanation to those who stand and watch. That is like the gap is where the action is. Thank you so much, Thomas. It's been a pleasure. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope our conversation never ends and goes on forever and ever.
Thanks so much. This has been great.